My name is Kate, and some people call me an explorer, which is a career about as relevant on our modern mapped world as being, say, like a mammoth hunter. The poet T.S. Eliot famously said that the end of all our exploring is to arrive back where we started and know the place for the first time. And so it seemed fitting that having arrived back at Carolina, where so many of my explorations began, this seemed like a good opportunity to take an accounting of the enterprise itself. You know, what is the meaning of exploration on a planet so mapped and tamed and deeply divided? But first, some background. As a kid, I wanted to be an explorer when I grew up, and I meant an explorer in the most historic sense of the term. You know, one of those intrepid Shackleton or Nansen types with an appetite for cold gruel and a knack for endless slogging and a disdain for the status quo. But my family lived in small town Ontario, where the tallest mountain I could see was a haystack and the widest horizon was a field of corn. And so it seemed pretty clear I'd been born centuries too late, or at least continents away from the kind of life I wanted to live. And the more quaint and tame my surroundings, the more I craved the total opposite. You know, mountains and deserts, glaciers and tundra, basically the kind of wildness that could wipe me out if I wasn't equal parts bold and careful. And in small town Ontario, I mostly found this wildness in books. My favorite when I was really young, like 10 or 11, was a children's edition of Marco Polo's travels on the Silk Road, that ancient trade route that for 1,000 years ferried people, goods, and ideas between Europe and Asia. You know, the illustrations in this book, it was mostly illustrations more than text. They showed Polo as a 17-year-old traveling across the Tibetan Plateau, where the tallest or the flattest plains are taller than most peaks in North America. Or they'd show him with a camel caravan making his way across the Taklamakan Desert, this ocean of sand, whose name, according to legend, if not literal translation, means those who go in never come out. Naturally, has only enhanced the appeal of that desert. So I was desperate to see places like this in more than pixels and words on a page. But my family could never afford to travel. And after studying all the maps, the modern maps I could find, I was alarmed to see that there were already highways sneaking across the Tibetan Plateau and the Taklamakan Desert. And so I figured that by the time I saved up enough money to go see these places for myself, they'd be as fenced and paved and full of subdivisions as small town Ontario. And there seemed few outlets left anywhere in this world for the kind of restlessness that ached inside me, this mad longing for a place without maps. And so I came to realize as a teenager that my only hope was to leave this world behind. And so I decided to become a scientist and go to Mars. Now, most teenagers long for another world, but as far as I could tell in the small town I grew up in, I was the only one who pined specifically for the red planet. And this seemed, you know, the last place in the solar system that you could leave the first footprints, plant the first flags, be a bona fide explorer. And so I studied really hard in hopes of launching myself there, and in the meanwhile launched myself to Carolina. And I really didn't begin to doubt this extraterrestrial mission in life until I had the chance as a sophomore to spend 2 weeks at the Mars Desert Research Station in Hanksville, Utah. And this is where crews of wannabe Martians wear fake spacesuits and go through all the motions of being on another planet for the sake of research. So picture cattle tracks and clumps of sagebrush and a white space capsule gleaming cinematically in front of a wilderness gone to rust. Now, for a while it was fun, kind of a grown-up game of make-believe. But as I trudged around Utah wearing a plastic visor helmet and a canvas onesie spacesuit, I was disconcerted by the fact that whenever I would look at a mountain, I would see this veneer of plexiglass. And whenever I reached out to touch canyon walls the color of embers, instead of that smooth, sun-warmed sandstone, I'd just feel the synthetic fabric of my glove. And as all kinds of weather howled outside my helmet, all I could hear was either radio static or my own percussive panting, like I was breathing down my own neck. And so the very technologies that would keep me alive on Mars made me feel at a deep remove from the place. My interactions with it neutered and sterile and often quite absurd. Especially when we ran out of food on the red planet and had to go to the local grocery store wearing spacesuits to resupply our rations. So after 2 weeks of following orders and speaking in acronyms and reporting my every move to a mock mission control, I'd had my fill of living in a bubble, even the red tinted variety. And I never admitted it to the rest of the crew, but I was homesick for my native planet. And long story short, because I only have 7 minutes, instead of going to Mars, I decided to bike the Silk Road. After all, thinking back to my old childhood idol, Marco Polo, he's known as an explorer, but all he really did was travel to lands that were new to him, but old to others, and then write about what he saw. And so I thought, could exploration be so simple? And as it turned out, cycling across the Taklamakan Desert and the Tibetan Plateau, and later across 10 different countries between Europe and Asia, it was torture. It was sublime. It was basically everything I'd ever wanted. And I realized that what I sought from exploration was the same thing I sought from a poem or a book or writing, which is for life or language to pummel me with its power again, with its fundamental mystery. What I craved was a kind of intimacy with immensity. And it turns out you don't have to go to another world to find that or feel that. You can go to, say, Uzbekistan. This was one of my favorite stretches of the Silk Road, and it was so hot by day there that my friend and I resorted to riding at night. And the desert was so flat that the constellations seemed to come right down to earth. So as we were biking in the dark, it was like we were traveling to them or even through them. And it was the closest I'd ever come to sort of what I imagined space exploration would be like. Only better, because I could breathe, I could laugh out loud, I could feel the wind on my face. And wearing a spacesuit, as I learned in Utah, really walls you off from all of that. So we long our whole lives for things we've never known, for places we've never been, for abstractions like success and happiness and exploration that we have fixed to certain achievements or lives, or in my case, planets. And I think abstractions can come alive to us in the most unexpected ways. It's so easy to get stuck on the letter of a dream as opposed to its spirit, or the specifics of an ambition as opposed to its essence. And as I see it now, exploration really isn't about planting flags and leaving footprints. It's not about how far you can go and how much you can suffer. It's really about how willing you are to let an experience rewrite your maps. Now, these days I live and write from an off-grid log cabin on the border of BC, Alaska, and the Yukon. And in some ways it's like living in a space station. You have to carefully monitor basic life support systems, like solar power coming in from the panels, and where your heat's coming from, how much water you have. Only I don't have to put on a spacesuit or wait in an airlock before going outside. And with caribou, wolves, moose as my nearest neighbors, I'm constantly reminded that humans are not, in fact, the center of everything, that we're part of a larger and more ancient order. And so in this respect, I don't think T.S. Eliot actually went far enough. The point of exploring isn't simply to get to know this place we all call home. The point isn't knowledge. The point is kinship or connection or a sense of belonging to the larger community of life on Earth. And whether we like it or not, we're all complicit, we're all connected, whether by the global atmosphere or the global economy. This world is the only home we have in all of the universe, the only place we can breathe without assistance. And I feel like we shouldn't need any more reason to take better care of it and of each other. And so in essence, this is my great hope for exploration in the modern world and for writing as a form of exploration. To make people fall so deeply in love with this world that they're never again tempted, as I once was, to abandon it for Mars.